whining, begging, and demanding. Aravis and Rossi helped us get into a young person's or a kid's skin to remember what it was like when we or our kids did exactly that or do exactly that. There are very many ways we observe whining or begging or demanding these days, and it's definitely not only coming from kids. Sometimes this whining and begging is hidden, but it's there. This behavior may look like exerting power over another person, possibly deviously. It may be living in our place of privilege without ever critiquing that. It may be refusing someone else the same opportunities that we take for granted. Or it sometimes takes the form of threatening someone who and accusing them of something that is absolutely not true. That may actually make all of us whining and demanding. How did we come to a place where this defines us, at least some of the time? Maybe that's the question we should ask about the ancient Israelite community. What brought them to this place of requesting, well, actually demanding a ruler, a king, so that they would be on par with other nations? Just a little about the history that precedes this story. There were problems in Israel, plenty of them. The 12 tribes of Israel were governed by a variety of leaders, judges, prophets, lowercase m military leaders, some righteous, some self serving. And these 12 tribes were in chaos. There was corruption, abuse of power, revenge, rape, murder, and they were the constant target of the superior and larger Philistine nation. The Israelites were tired of it. They were tired of being the underdog and they were tired of being different. So the Israelite elders banded together to come to the one leader, Samuel, whom they still trusted. And they said, "Hey, Samuel, time to try something new. Since your sons don't in any way reflect your commitment to Yahweh or to just governance for that matter, we've come up with another plan. Appoint a ruler to lead us so that we can be like all the nations around us." Wow. Do you think Samuel even saw that coming? Our text states that he was old, or at least the elders that came to address him said he was old. It doesn't seem that they came here to negotiate or to discuss. And we presume that they had done that amongst themselves before approaching Samuel. As the lead prophet in Israel, Samuel still had the final say. But the elders may have thought, he's a pushover, given the fact that he had already given over the reins of much of the leadership to his sons. Or they maybe felt that he was in no position to fight what they demanded. But it would still carry some weight to have his blessing, albeit hesitant, we come to understand. To give them the benefit of the doubt, however, they were tired of the dysfunctional life in the 12 tribes. They were tired of being constantly attacked by the larger, more organized nation. They looked at this neighboring empire with envy, not knowing exactly what life was like for the individual citizens of that nation. We seldom do when we look in from the outside. They may have felt that a powerful person would unite them, that stringent, consistent laws would be imposed. They may have even wanted someone who would alleviate the constant need for individual and regional responsibility. So when Samuel hears this and prays Yahweh, somewhat surprisingly, from our perspective at least, says, okay, fine, let them have their way, but have them look at what that's going to be like. Be sure that you lay this in front of them. And then comes this long litany that EJ read, all of the things that come along with this demand. It reminds me a little bit of a restaurant order. where you get a lot of sides along with the main order. But then in the fine print, it says no substitutions on this order. So to quote a few things from the text again, your ruler will take your youths and make them serve as charioteers or with the cavalry, while others will be made to run in front of the chariots. Here we have the implementation of a military draft, no personal choice. Your ruler will appoint some of them as commanders of troops of 1,000 and divisions of 100. Maybe that's the birth of the military industrial complex. Others will be forced to plow and harvest the royal fields. So citizens will become essential workers who will now be in service to someone else. Still others will work at making weapons of war and equipment for chariots. Arms manufacturing becomes an industry. Your daughters will be taken as cooks, bakers, and makers of perfume. Their young women suddenly became domestic labor, the help. Your ruler will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves and give them to various governing officials and attendants. Essentially, that's land confiscation for the benefit of the oligarchy. And another name for that is eminent domain. But that's not all yet. You will have to tithe your crops and your vineyards for the ruler to use these funds in support of the eunuchs and slaves. Taxation is implemented to pay for the expenses of an oppressive regime. The ruler will take your male and female workers, your best cattle and donkeys, and take them for their personal use. Here's a picture of exploitation of humans and personally gained wealth. Again, benefiting only the ruling class. Your ruler will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourself will become slaves. There you have it. I guess we could call that trickle-down exploitation. Okay, fine. But tell them all of this. Give them what they ask for, but not without clear warning. I admit that all of that leaves me kind of breathless and not a little bit concerned. I could likely read past that and shrug it off by saying, well, that was then, and we've learned a lot from history. But have we really? There's a short phrase that is very telling. When the elders come to Samuel with their demand for a ruler, the statement that follows is, Samuel was not happy. What do leaders do when they're not happy? Do we argue? Do we try to influence momentum in the direction that we feel is right? Do we manipulate? Do we try everything, give it our best effort, and then when all else fails? What did Samuel do? I don't hear him question the demand that came to him. I don't hear him calling for his advisors. All I read is he prayed to Yahweh. We're given no indication of what that prayer was like, but the fact that he was unhappy gives us a little bit of clue. This was the man whom God called when he was still a young child. This communication line was well used. It was well in place and well tested. Yahweh clarifies. The elders' demand was not a rejection of Samuel's leadership, but of the structure that Yahweh had put in place. We each tend to have a specific idea of what prayer is like and what it will bring about. We hope for resolution or a change of some sort, and there's scriptural evidence that that happens, but that doesn't happen here. Yahweh says, okay, fine. Don't argue with them. Give them what they're asking for, but let them know what they're asking for. I confess this is the hard part of prayer, and this is a hard part of the text. Regardless of how much we practice letting go and embracing what is, it's tough when we think we see the best situation, the best solution, and then we're sent in a different direction, a direction we may even think is wrong. Leader or not, this is hard. It's also a good reminder that it's reality. And we may be faced with direction that we're not comfortable with. Are we open to that? Does that knowledge discourage us from praying? It very well might, if we're honest. We're not told whether Samuel struggled with the directive, nor how long it took him to actually share that with the elders. But he had come to a place of trusting Yahweh, and he gave that difficult message. It may be equally troubling to use this passage and ask the question, does Yahweh allow this push toward an oppressive empire without interference? And does that still happen? Sometimes we feel we're fighting against the steady slide into authoritarianism and oppression. And this begs the question, does God side with empire? Or perhaps God is laissez-faire about the governance of a nation. A parallel question would be, can God be trusted? Can God be trusted to give us the strength in our struggle for justice and equity, or are we on our own? Is the divine response really? Okay, fine. If that's how you are, you'll need to learn a lesson. This is another example of why it's so important to take the entirety of Scripture into consideration. Since Jesus was executed at the hand of an empire that was characterized by many of the same kinds of things that are outlined here in this text, we cannot take these verses to assume that God is apathetic, that God sides with empire. We cannot take it to mean that the divine buckles when confronted with the loudest whiner or the most devious autocrat. What history makes clear is that Israel did not fall into decay when they instituted the monarchy. Israel was already in disarray. Some scriptural narratives show people as being just as corrupt and violent then as what we're experiencing and reading about today. People were not treated with respect. They were not safe. They did not have a placid existence. There was already oppression and exploitation without just governance. We may think that we have recently rejected a grave threat to just governance and replaced it with an administration representing more fairness, more respect and protection, more humanity. But we must remember we were already flawed and fallen, and we still are. Our history is not one of fairness and tranquility, and there has never been liberty and justice for all. The CNN special this past week on the Tulsa massacre of 1921 is a grim reminder of just that. Exchanging one flawed system for another reminds us that our work for justice and equity and fairness is ongoing. We work, we speak truth to power, we organize, we cry for justice, we pray, we rest, and we regroup. I also had to think of Dr. Anthony Fauci in this context this week. Now, there's a person who has had a long life of service for humanity, working with and living through multiple and varied administrations. Hearing him speak earlier this week, he said, I will continue to do my job, and since I'm a public figure, I will take the arrows. He is an example of staying the course, listening to people, following and trusting science, and showing unrelenting dedication to the well-being, not only to the people of this nation, but for the entire globe. Have we learned from history or do we keep repeating it? Reading this text would have us believe it describes what we're living right here and now. So, where do we go from here? Do we despair of a God who seems to say, okay, fine, let them have what they demand? Or do we see this as a redirection to see a bigger picture, a one that calls us to be alert for duplicity in any form and in any structure? To recognize that corruption exists anywhere and in any system, and to be vigilant to hold individual and collective responsibility as a divine trust. It is never a good idea to hand that over, whether to a nation, a state, a church, a family system, or to an employer. This story also reminds us that we never underestimate the need for prayer, even and especially when we don't understand it. It is a vital connection to God. It keeps us grounded, looking beyond our subjective perception and limited vision. It also reminds us that there is no system that will save us, not a nation state, not a progressive theology, not an inclusive platform, not a specific type of family. We live in a broken world that will always need our voice, our engagement, our fight for justice as long as we live. The broken world, this broken world we live in, needs our deepest commitment to the God of justice, the Prince of Peace, the Spirit of mystery, the reconciler, the advocate for the sidelined. Recognizing this puts us onto a different plane, one on which we recognize that we are planting trees under whose shade we will never sit. On this plane, we will never give up our most concerted efforts, and we will simultaneously recognize that outcomes are beyond our control, but they are never outside of God's awareness and presence. This perspective, possibly more than anything else, guides capable, wise leadership. It is then that, okay, fine, can become okay. All is well. May it be so.